So this is a little tutorial on consumer and producer surplus, or the mutual gains from voluntary market trades. In economics, we assert all the time that markets are usually efficient, but how can we actually prove that? Well, we can measure the benefit to consumers and the benefit from producers when they trade with each other. Consumer surplus is that benefit that accrues to consumers when they are willing to pay more than they actually have to pay. For most of us, for most of the goods we choose to buy, this is going to be true. We walk away from the things that are not worth the price tag. Some examples. Alicia's willing to pay $59 for a book. Brad willing to pay $45. Claudia less. Darren less. Edwina less. How much consumer surplus is generated? Well, it's going to depend upon the price of the book. If the book is free, Alicia gets $59. It's worth $59 to her, and she only has to pay $0, so she collects that $59 worth of benefit. She was willing to part with $59, only has to part with $0. She gets to walk away and spend that $59 on something else. She's $59 richer in a sense. And Brad is $45, Claudia $35. Well, probably the price is not going to be $0. What if the price is $30? First of all, who chooses to buy the book? Only those that value it at more than $30. That's Alicia, Brad, and Claudia. And the amount of consumer surplus they each collect is the maximum price they're willing to pay. For Alicia, $59, minus the actual market price, $30. So Alicia collects $29 worth of consumer surplus. Brad collects $15 worth of consumer surplus. And Claudia collects $5 worth of consumer surplus. For Darren and Edwina, there's $0. It's not a negative consumer surplus, it's just $0 because they choose not to buy. The total consumer surplus then will be the sum of all who choose to buy their consumer surplus. You can see it's sort of an area under the demand curve and above the price. Here's your first practice question. So to generalize it, we are looking for probably a more normal looking demand curve which won't have all those stair steps because it'll actually have a lot of people in it. It'll be more continuous. So the area under the demand curve above the price, in this case the price is 20, and that demand curve begins up there at the vertical intercept at 80. And you can calculate the area of that consumer surplus, which is the sum of all the people who are willing to pay more than they actually have to pay. Of course, remembering that the equation for the area of a triangle is half base times height helps you figure out exactly how big that consumer surplus is. Here's another practice question. And the answer. So if there's a decrease in the price, what happens? Well, probably more people are going to buy it. Here we pick up Darren, because more people will find that their maximum value surpasses the actual price. Consumer surplus increases for two reasons. You pick up new people, new consumers, and you increase the existing consumer surplus for the already existing consumers, like Alicia, Brad, and Claudia all get a higher consumer surplus than before. You can see here how the gains from the increase in consumer surplus are split. Consumers are not the only ones that benefit from this voluntary transaction. We also have suppliers or producers. And we assume a normal shaped supply curve here, upward sloping. Again, it's stair step in nature because we only have a few people. And so it's a discrete supply curve. If you've got Andrew at 5, Donna at 15, Carlos at 25, Betty 35, Engelbert at 45, these are known as their reservation prices. They will not accept a price for this book below that specified. Here is a question and an answer to practice. So if Jane's reservation price is above the actual price, she will not offer herself for tutoring. Dora is ambivalent. She's going to be finding that the value to her reservation price is $10, and that's the actual market price. She may choose to do it, but she won't collect any producer surplus. When we get to Lee, Sam, and Kathy, we've got something different. We've got people whose cost or reservation price, the price at which below that they will not part with the good, but above that they will find it that in their self-interest to sell the good. For Lee, Sam, and Kathy, their reservation price is below the price, the market price. So it's worth $8 to them, and they're going to sell it to somebody who will give them $10. So Lee collects $2 of producer surplus. Pardon me. Sam collects $4. Kathy collects $6. And of course, you can add them all up for total producer surplus. So that producer surplus is just defined as the difference between the market price and the price that they actually receive, or as we know it, the difference between the supply curve and the actual market price. So generalized in a more continuous supply function with lots of people in it, lots of data points, you're going to get a total producer surplus as the area above the supply curve, below the price. Here's another practice question for you. And your answer. One more practice question for you. And your answer. Now, what happens if the price increases? For producers, a price increase is a good thing. So price increase is probably going to increase producer surplus. Sure enough, suppliers like a higher price. So when we see the price rise from 5 to 7, we expect that their producer surplus will rise. And sure enough, there will be a larger area above the supply curve and below that price. Part of that accrues to the original sellers, who collect more dollars of producer surplus each, and also new suppliers will jump into the scene. So new textbook owners will decide to sell their textbooks because now it's worth it, whereas it was not before. Or in this case, it's wheat, new wheat producers. So the total surplus, when we're talking about producer and consumer surplus, is going to be the sum of the producer and the consumer surplus. So those two triangles. And what does that mean? If you can understand this and explain it without the graph, before you do more work with the graph, that's the way to go. Because it's one thing to graph consumer and producer surplus, but to actually be able to explain what they are is huge. So you want to say things like, all right, the consumer and producer surplus together, what do they represent? Why do we care about graphing them? They exist, my answer would be they exist as a proof to sort of show the benefit of these market transactions, these voluntary transactions that people undertake with each other. So when these people are allowed to trade freely with each other voluntarily, they choose to sell 1,000 books at $30 each. And a bunch of consumers are better off for it. A bunch of consumers who are willing to pay more than $30 end up collecting consumer surplus. These guys, all that consumer surplus is collected by virtue of that trade happening. And likewise, these producers, it makes sense for them to make the trade as well because they value the good much less than the buyer valued it. So they're willing to sell for much less than 30. So they collect that producer surplus, and you get this nice collection, monetary and mathematical picture of how much income and benefit is generated, right, from this trade. So producer surplus, this will be something along the lines of profit, although we don't have all the costs showing here. But producer surplus is in the same family as profit. Consumer surplus is, there's no nice, cute word for it, but consumer surplus, we think about the money that's left in your pocket after you were willing to pay a lot more for the thing than you actually had to. So that's benefit, right? Benefits to consumers and producers that accrue from this trade, from these trades. So that's why we like free market trades. And we notice that consumers and producers stop selling once it doesn't make any more sense to trade. If you move to the right of 1,000, these trades begin to happen, then you get weird stuff happening where, like, this trade, the demanders don't value it very much. How do we know? We can just look at the value that a demander would pay, right? The maximum value that he receives from that book is less than the reservation price for the sellers for that book. So the seller's value is greater than the buyer's value, so the seller might as well hold on to it. So we don't like these trades, right? We only like trades up to 1,000, and that's another reason why we like free markets that are efficient, that are voluntary, that have perfect information, that are competitive. We put stipulations on the markets. There are well-functioning markets and poorly functioning markets. But if they're well-functioning, we think that they do a pretty good job of allocating goods to the people that want them in an efficient way. So there's your proof for why producer and consumer surplus are a good way to measure the efficiency and the benefits of markets. I hope you enjoyed it.